Earlier, we discussed the Minister of Finance, Wale Edun's statement about Nigeria not being in a good position to continue relying on borrowings. Edun admits that Nigeria's debt servicing has reached an all-time high of 98% of the country's revenue, and it will simply make a bad situation worse if the country continues to rely on borrowing. Joining us now to discuss this and more on Nigeria's inflation rate is Professor Ndubisi Nwokoma, a professor of financial economics and director, Center for Economic Policy Analysis and Research at the University of Lagos. Good morning, Professor Nwokoma, and thank you for joining us. Well, two things in that introduction.
Thank you. Thanks for inviting me.
Yes.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Nigeria's headline inflation rate has jumped by 0.61% to 27.33% in October, from 26.72 in September. But isn't this a self-fulfilling prophecy? Every month we come here and we say, oh, this has jumped from this place to this place. Then, of course, food inflation is now 37.33%. So every time MBS releases its statistics, we still come here and we still say, oh, food inflation is the major problem. Now we're told this is the highest since August 2005. Why is it that all the measures being adopted by government are not working? Interest rate, it works in other parts of the world. It doesn't work in this place. If we hike interest rate, inflation just keeps galloping. We're in a situation where the EU economists call stagflation. Why is it that these measures don't work? Although the spokesperson for the CBN says, well, it's at this level because monetary policies introduced by this administration are working. Okay, maybe when headline inflation reaches 40%, it will still come back and say monetary policies are working. What are we dealing with?
Yeah, thank you very much. Thanks for raising up these critical issues on the economy. And I think it's something that everybody should be concerned about. And anybody can actually ask that question, why are the policies of government not working seemingly? And I think it's good to take a look at the background and take a look at the past and see what actually has been happening and why we are experiencing what we are experiencing today. And number one, we need to take a look at the past 8 years have had so much kind of challenges or bumps in the management of the Nigerian economy. But let's not even go too far. Let's take a look at this year, what happened when we have a new government. And the two major policy pronouncements, actually have destabilized the entire macroeconomy. And I think the issue is being able to bring about some measure of stabilization. The fuel subsidy removal. I'm not too sure whether the government had a kind of backup plan before that pronouncement was made. Secondly, on the area of the foreign exchange market and the harmonization of all the various markets, of the rates in the various markets, I'm not sure whether there was a kind of background work that was done to determine what are the consequences and how do we manage the consequences. So I think, I think those are the kind of issues we can look at in recent times. And the issue is that these policies work elsewhere, like we have said, and why they're not working in Nigeria. The point is that when you take a look at inflation, we must take a look at what are the causative factors. What is the cause of inflation? Not only in Nigeria, but globally. One major cause we can look at things we call the cost push factors. Look at cost of production. Things like security, things like cost of goods, things like other factors that have to do with the foreign sector. Talk about the exchange rate. And we now want to see whether those ones actually are part of the cost push factors that are driving inflation. Then look at the issue of a demand pool, which is talking about increase in wages or talking about increased consumer spending. Those are not the case for Nigeria. they will look at the issue of money supply. Is it that we have too much money in the system? That actually we see whether that is a problem, because the issue of ways and means, most times you print money and you increase the level of money supply. So we can take a look at these factors one after the other and see, can it be cost push? Can it be money supply, monetary policy? Because, or can it be that the interest rate is not high enough? Because when you increase the interest rates, you are having a credit squeeze. You're making credit more difficult to get. And by so doing, trying to bring down, to dampen down, to bring down inflation, which has been done by the central bank for many months. And it appears. So we need to take a look at these policies together. In the past few years, the ways and means have actually been rising. That is, we have been pumping money in, into the system, increasing money supply. Because when you talk about ways and means, a number of times you have to get money, and it's highly inflationary. And under the past administration, ways and means actually jumped up to over 23 trillion. So you keep on pumping in money, and you can print and all that. And that actually has been highly inflationary. That we can take a look at that. Then the exchange rate, this harmonization, by June this year, we had it like the parallel market was going for around 750 naira to $1, and the official market was going like 461. Now it's about over 1,000 naira to $1 for parallel market, and about 840 for the, so which means that also has a cost push effect on inflation. So we look at the ways and means, we look at the exchange rate, and then we look at other cost push factors that actually will have been able to drive inflation. So it is not that things don't work in Nigeria, but we look at what where are we pushing this this rate up? Food inflation, because everybody talks about replacement cost. If you're a businessman and you buy something at 5 naira, and that 5 naira is no longer the price in the market, you look at the replacement cost. If I want to replace my stock, that thing I bought 5 naira yesterday to sell at 6 naira, it is now 8 naira. So definitely, I will not sell at 6 naira. I will not sell at something like 9 or 10 naira. And that affects every commodity, even those that are not linked to the exchange rate. And that is actually the issue. So what we can be doing is to take a look at those factors that are causing it. The exchange rate, we need to address that. We need to address ways and means. I'll address the issue, other things like security, production, agricultural products, transportation. There are many cost push factors which we'll look at in discussing inflation. So these policies actually, they are not something that cannot work in Nigeria. They can work as they work elsewhere. But we are causing these things to keep on going up because they are things we're not addressing. We need to take a look at the foreign exchange market and see how we can arrest that, stabilize that market. Take a look at, make sure we don't keep on borrowing from central bank. The government, the fiscal authority, not borrow from central bank, so that they keep on printing money. So we should look at that. So those are the reasons why it appears that these things are not working. They can work, and they do work elsewhere.
Okay, so they can work, Professor Nwokoma, they do work elsewhere. We are seeing them work in Ghana. We know the inflation numbers before now in Ghana, and we've seen how it's gone and declined. But with us here, also the reason why it's not working is the lack of direction and government will and policy somersaults. I want you to talk through that.
Policy somersault actually has been there even before this current government came. Government actually, a number of times, they don't have a focus. You have a policy, and when you have a policy, you are giving the economic direction. This is where we want to focus on as a government. And people now begin to put in resources. People begin to apply, to make investments based on where direction the government is pointing. We are going to focus on this sector, and that is a policy. And people now begin to make investments. And once they have made the investments in that particular sector, and then government now changes the policy, that's a somersault. So all those investments made in that sector will just waste. And that has been a problem for the country. We are not consistent. We have a policy framework, and we drive it to the end and get the outcomes that will be able to enhance economic growth, economic development. So these somersaults have been there even before the Tinubu administration. And I think it's an area we need to, particularly in third world countries, particularly when you have so much of varying interests in driving the economy, in being able to enhance economic growth. So, why government is having this challenge, in my view, is that there were no preparations made. Like I said, those two major policy pronouncements. In my view, I don't think there were some major preparatory steps taken that this is going to have this consequence, or we didn't anticipate those consequences. If you harmonize the rates, have you talked about rates for foreign exchange? Have you been able to talk about supply? Where would the money come from that will stabilize the market? Because in any market, like we've been saying, there are two key forces, supply and demand forces. So if you're talking about harmonizing the rates, beautiful, I support that. But how do you support the market? How do you manage demand? And I don't know, I'm not sure whether those things were properly articulated. And so until we now see that it is not late, we cannot sit down and find out how do we arrest this, because we are now swimming against the current. How do we arrest the exchange rate so that it will stabilize that? Because when the rate is a price. If you arrest the volatility in the rates, then you are giving a signal to investors to be able to come in, to bring in their money. To those who now want to invest in a particular sector, they know what the price structures are. And then they can be able to make appropriate investment. And that will stabilize prices. If you talk about food inflation, is going up. Because exchange rate, in my view, is actually what is driving the current surge in inflation. The exchange rate is becoming difficult to tame. And it appears government seemingly may not appear to have a magic wand to address it. But it can be confronted and actually arrested properly and put in its proper place. So the policy somersault, government needs to stop that and make sure that the exchange rate issue is properly addressed. And if we don't do that, I have my fears that the inflation figures will keep on getting worse, because they are largely cost push factors. They are driving the cost of production. And because of our level of import dependence, we need to address the issue of the exchange rate. Thank God, I'm happy that we are working towards minimizing the level of ways and means from central bank to the fiscal authorities. We are trying to arrest that. We need to keep at that. But exchange rate needs to be addressed. And then make sure we remove all disruptions to the supply chain. Prof, that will help us to bring down the inflation rates.
I think the floating of the Naira idea was ill-advised.
Pardon?
Do you think the floating of the Naira was ill-advised?
I don't think it was ill-advised. I think it's the preparation for the policy pronouncement, in my view, was inadequate. The preparation was inadequate because before you can make a pronouncement, you need to prepare for it. Because there's what we call, like I said earlier, the announcement effect of policy. There's an announcement effect for every policy. When you make an announcement, the market gets a signal, all the markets, and everybody begins to take position. So before you make an announcement or make a pronouncement of a new policy, you must be able to anticipate, have a macroeconomic framework, and look at the input-output implications. Because what affects one sector has an implication on the other sector. If you like, you can talk about having a macroeconometric model. And then you change one variable. If I change the exchange rate from 461 to 700, how will that go through the entire system? A model can do that. And then you can now know what will be the consequence for price of other commodities. And that will also help you to know what will I do to cushion the effect across the economy. And I think that in my view, I don't know. I don't think that was done. It appears it was not done. But it is not late. It can still be arrested. And then you now take a look at consumer spending is not high enough. Because when you talk about consumer spending, it helps to enhance production. Because because even at this rate, how many people are actually buying? How many people are buying? And it stagnates the economy. So you need to work on strengthening consumer spending. So the preparation for the policy pronouncements seemingly was inadequate. And I think that actually is where it is now becoming, you are now trying to be reactive to the policy, the effect of the policy pronouncements. I think that, in my view, was where the error came from. And I think it can be arrested. CBN can actually come up and see how they can use the MPR, the monetary policy rate, to hike up the MPR slightly, and then make sure you work on the cutting credit to the fiscal authorities. You don't print money, and then that will help you to address the issue of money supply. And then once you do that, and you stabilize the exchange rate, both in the parallel market and the official market, and see how you can harmonize them. I believe in 2-3 months, these rates can be, this inflation rate can actually begin to stabilize. And because the ordinary man is crying every time you see prices going up. And that is not good for the growth of the Nigerian economy.
Well, Prof, yesterday, the Minister of Finance appeared before the Joint Senate Committee on Finance. And the major issue on the table was the medium-term expenditure framework, 2024 to 2026, which has a borrowing plan of 26 trillion naira. But the Minister of Finance told the Joint Committee that Nigeria cannot afford to pile up more debts and that we cannot borrow to finance budget deficit. What do you think?
I think I support that. However, it's not just saying it. You need to know what are the consequences. Because the level of borrowing is so high. If you talk about our debt service to revenue ratio, it's very high, about 100% or thereabout. And if you keep on borrowing, how do we sustain the economy? So I think the borrowing level, in my view, needs to actually be curtailed. However, government is not, in my view, playing its role by cutting down the cost of governance. So I support the proposal of the Minister of Finance, being able to cut down the level of borrowing in the MTF, the medium-term expenditure framework, so that we cannot begin to live with the money that we can generate. However, there may be need for exceptional borrowing for projects that actually can pay back on itself. Government needs to work more in the area of cost of governance. And people have been shouting about buying yachts, buying cars for this and all that. And many people don't appear to have confidence that the government is working towards cutting down the cost of governance. Because if you don't borrow more, you won't be able to cut down, have the sense of austerity, which appears lacking from what people have been expressing. The supplementary budget actually can speak about that, because many of the items on that on the list are not very urgent. Because supplementary it talks about what cannot wait until the next cycle of budgeting. So if something cannot wait, it means that thing is something very, very critical. If you look at the items on the supplementary budget, you find some of them actually can wait. They are not something that are very critical. So if people have that sense that government is not cutting down the cost of governance, if you don't borrow and you don't cut down on the cost of governance, you are making things worse. And we can see things getting worse than it is now. We talk about coming in of next year. So the minister is very much in order, in my view, but they also need to go further than that by making sure that there is a sense of austerity in governance. And people should see it. Let not people see that the ordinary man is the only one who is living in austere times. Let it be seen in the way the legislature and the executive are operating, that actually there's austerity in town, and that will help us. So we cannot cut down the level of borrowing, manage the level of borrowing either from within the economy or from outside, and then make sure we address this exchange rate issue. Once we do all those ones, I think we can manage the other problem that could arise after that. That's my view.
Well, thank you very much, Professor Ndubisi Nwokoma, for joining us on the morning show. Thank you very much indeed.